Hey there. Tonight we journey back to a sleepy village where the air is still, the sheep murmur in the distance, and the future is about to quietly unravel. You trudge along a narrow, rutted lane beneath the low gray skies of Derbyshire, England. It's 1665, and the town of Eyam isn't famous yet. Nestled between hills and hedgerows, it feels like a place time ignores. But in just a few short weeks, Eyam will become a quiet anomaly in the story of the plague, a village that chooses to save others by sealing its own fate. You probably won't survive this. But hey, you knew that when you clicked on a video about the Black Death at bedtime. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You enter Eyam the same way everyone does, on foot. No grand gates, no stone archways, just a winding lane that seems to grow quieter the deeper in you go. Wooden cottages huddle close to each other, roofs thatched in straw, chimneys trailing lazy threads of smoke. The smell of peat and bread mingles in the morning air. Chickens cluck. Somewhere, a baby cries. Life, for now, goes on. You pass the church, small, thick-walled, its stone soaked with centuries of prayer and drafts. Inside, a parson's voice echoes faintly. A marriage? A funeral? Hard to say. They blend together in places like this. Eyam isn't rich. It's not poor, either. It survives, thanks to sheep, wool, and a stubborn streak that runs deeper than its well water. But a change is coming. And it begins, as changes often do, with something small. A package. A traveling tailor, who usually works from room to room, has ordered cloth from London. Fine stuff, probably meant for a wealthy household nearby. It arrives folded, bundled in straw, a little damp from the journey. Harmless, you'd think. But tucked in the folds of that fabric are tiny, unwelcome guests, fleas, carriers of something Eyam is entirely unprepared for. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes before calamity. The birds still sing. The children still chase each other across muddy courtyards. But already, inside the tailor's cottage, something terrible is brewing. Over the next few days, the man falls ill. A strange fever, swelling in the armpits and groin, blackened patches on the skin. His assistant, too. Then a child nearby. It doesn't look like anything they've seen before, though some remember stories from their grandparents, whispers of a sickness that swept the land a generation or two back. You feel it first in the way people talk, or rather, stop talking. Doors close a little quicker. Markets thin out. The butcher looks nervous but keeps chopping. And here's your first reality check. You wouldn't know what to do, because no one knows what to do. There are no doctors in Eyam, not really. Maybe a midwife. Maybe an old woman who swears by rosemary and goose-fat poultices. But against this, nothing. Historians still argue about how exactly the disease traveled from that parcel of cloth to the rest of the village. Was it really the fleas? Or something airborne? Or divine retribution, as some swore in their sermons? You sit on a low wall outside the tavern and overhear a debate. One man says it's a punishment for the sin of vanity. Another blames the recent eclipse. A third suggests it's a French plot. And you begin to realize something. When people are scared, they reach for whatever stories are close by, no matter how strange. A quirky little truth? Some villagers think garlic worn under the armpits will keep the sickness at bay. One woman's even rubbing onion on her son's soles each night, praying it'll draw the poison downward and out. The tailor dies, others follow. A cluster of homes near his begin to show signs: coughing, fever, rashes. A family of 5 vanishes behind their door and is never seen again. People start to avoid each other in the lanes. You catch yourself pulling your cloak tighter as you pass someone coughing. It's silly. You're only imagining all this. But your fingers twitch. The parson begins ringing the bell more often. Funerals stack, and you start to feel something else. Claustrophobia. Not from walls, but from fate. It doesn't happen all at once. That's the cruel trick. The plague creeps, then pounces. It gives hope, then takes it. And in a small village like Eyam, with no real roads out and no hospitals in, the options are limited. You peek through a cottage window and see a man washing his hands, scrubbing them raw. Behind him, his wife lies curled on the floor. You look away. Would you have stayed, or would you have run? Most did, in other towns. The wealthy fled. The doctors, if they had any, left first. Cities like London watched their upper classes abandon entire boroughs. But Eyam does something different, something strange, something both foolish and noble. But that comes later. For now, you light a candle, set it near the window, and watch as another quiet morning in Eyam slips into another uneasy evening. The air carries whispers, not words, and in the distance, a wolf howls. Or maybe it's just a dog left untied. Either way, you don't sleep well tonight. Morning comes, but it doesn't feel like morning. The light is thin and gray, and the village is quieter than usual, as if the sun itself hesitates to rise over Eyam. You step outside and notice the baker's shutters haven't opened. No scent of bread, no cue of clucking hens waiting to snatch fallen crumbs. Just silence, that kind that hums in your ears like a warning bell. People have begun whispering about names: the Hadfields, the Thorpes, 3 from the Siddall family. Death doesn't pick at random, or so it seems. It moves in small circles, family by family, house by house, like it's working through a list no one else can see. The villagers gather in the churchyard, but not inside the church. Not anymore. Even the vicar, William Mompesson, is wary. He stands near the ancient stone wall, his voice low and grave. You hear the words containment, quarantine, and sacrifice. He's suggesting something unthinkable. You shift your weight, frown, and wonder if you heard right. Stay here? Let the outside world go on while Eyam stays sealed. No one in, no one out. You glance around. Some faces are pale with fear, others red with fury. One old man spits in the grass and mutters, "He wants us buried alive." But others nod slowly. You can see it in their eyes. They've already lost too much to risk losing more. The idea isn't Mompesson's alone. There's another clergyman, Thomas Stanley, an older, sterner sort, more fire and brimstone than you're used to. He and Mompesson usually don't get along, one Anglican, the other a Puritan. But Plague is a powerful peacemaker. Together, they propose what's never been done before: a voluntary lockdown. No soldiers, no royal order, just a shared choice: stay, isolate, and stop the disease from spreading to the neighboring towns. Historians still argue whether this decision was made out of piety, practicality, or sheer despair. Some say it was love for humanity. Others think it was the knowledge they had nowhere else to go. A fringe theory? A few even believe Mompesson was secretly ordered by higher authorities to make Eyam the experiment. See what happens when you trap the disease instead of fleeing it. No documents support that, but the whispers persist. You head back to your borrowed room, a simple place above the cobblers. The windows are small, the ceiling low. It smells of tallow and damp wool. A note has been slipped under your door. Quarantine begins at sunrise. Outside, the village begins to change. Small boundary stones are placed along the outskirts, some etched with shallow hollows. Coins dipped in vinegar are left there by villagers to trade for food, left by farmers from outside. No contact, no bargaining, just silent transactions under the sky. You walk to one such boundary. It's just a mossy rock, but now it's more than that. It's the edge of your world. You place your palm on it and feel the coolness of the stone, the roughness of lichen. This is as far as you'll go. Inside the village, people begin marking their doors, not with crosses, but with bundles of herbs. Lavender, rosemary, rue, supposed plague repellents. They hang them like charms, half science, half superstition. It doesn't hurt to hope. You hear about a woman named Elizabeth Hancock, who's just buried her husband and 6 children in 8 days. No one can help. No one dares. She digs the graves herself, just outside her cottage. Locals call it Riley's Field. It's quiet now, grass already growing back, as if the ground prefers to forget. Would you have managed? With a spade and a prayer, all alone? Food becomes an issue. Supplies from surrounding farms trickle in, but there's little variety. You eat stale rye bread, weak broth, the occasional turnip. The butcher's pigs have all been slaughtered, smoked, and shared. Chickens are kept closer now. Fewer eggs, fewer thieves. One strange detail: some villagers take to chewing tobacco or smoking pipes constantly, convinced the smoke will purify the air. You catch yourself doing it too. Not because you believe it, but because it gives your hands something to do. And sleep? Sleep is slippery now. Each night you hear distant coughs, then closer ones, the fevered mutterings of someone down the lane, and once, terrifyingly, silence, the kind that falls too fast, too final. You find yourself cataloging sounds in the dark: a creaking beam, the soft patter of rats in the thatch, the slosh of water in a bucket. You try to count heartbeats to drift off, but they only remind you you're still here, still vulnerable. Yet, despite the fear, something surprising begins to happen. Routines form. People bake. People sing. A group of young women draw patterns in the dust with sticks and pretend they're dancing at a wedding. You even help a neighbor repair a broken stool. It's these little gestures, quiet defiance against despair, that keep the village from unraveling. Historians note that Eyam didn't descend into madness or violence the way other plague-struck places sometimes did. No looting, no scapegoats, no mass graves dug in panic. It's possible the shared decision to stay gave them a fragile sense of control, a story they could cling to. Still, the toll grows. The village gravedigger eventually dies. There's no one left to ring the bell. The churchyard fills, and some families begin digging small plots in their own gardens, just to spare others the risk. You walk past one such spot: a fresh mound, a single wooden marker, and a flower laid carefully atop it. A poppy, out of season. Someone had been saving it. There's beauty in Eyam's sorrow. Strange to say, but true. It's in the handwritten prayers slipped under doors, in the neighbor who leaves an extra candle on your step, in the 2 boys who build a toy boat and float it down the stream, waving to it as if it might carry word of them to the world beyond. You crouch near that same stream and wash your hands, just as the villagers do now with a kind of reverence. Water doesn't stop the plague, but it soothes, The vicar posts another letter, an update on the boundary stone. More families lost, fewer symptoms reported, a cautious note of hope. You trace the letters with your finger, wondering who among your neighbors will live long enough to read the next one. The days stretch on, blending together like candle wax pooling on a long-forgotten table. In Eyam, time no longer ticks, it sighs. The village, once full of chatter and clatter, is now a place of muffled sounds and careful footsteps. You become hyper-aware of every cough, every sneeze, every unopened door. And then, almost too quietly to notice, it starts to work. Fewer people fall sick. The wave of death seems to slow. There's no cheer, of course, just a new kind of silence. Not the paralyzing hush of fear, but something closer to patience, recovery. You notice the herbs on doors wilt and get replaced less often. A few daring children peek out from behind hedges, then retreat just as fast. Historians still debate whether this lull was real or imagined, whether the village's collective immunity had begun to build, or the disease simply ran out of steam. But whatever the reason, life doesn't return. It reshapes. You don't dream of escape anymore. You dream of normal things. A warm roll, a clean shirt, a full sentence from a friend without trembling at the sound of their voice. You help an elderly neighbor collect firewood. She tells you stories of winters past and casually mentions her husband's grave, right there by the gooseberry bush. She says it like she's pointing out a garden gnome. You realize grief has woven itself into daily life so thoroughly that it no longer startles. Even so, you're not immune to fear. One morning, you wake with a headache and a tightness in your chest. You freeze, sit upright, feel your own forehead like your hands don't belong to you. Just a bad dream? Just bad sleep? You don't eat that day. You barely breathe. By evening, the ache fades, but the memory stays. You're not alone in these false alarms. Everyone has them. Someone faints and the whole lane locks their doors. A rash appears on a boy's arm. It's from nettles, not plague, but for a few hours, you all brace for another funeral. The paranoia is part of survival now. And then you notice something strange. Fewer funerals. No one says it out loud at first. It feels like a jinx, but you sense it in the air. Hope, hesitantly clearing its throat. You find yourself revisiting the boundary stones more often, not to leave coins or collect supplies, but to see, to feel connected. There's a soft groove on one side now, where fingers have idly traced it during long, solitary visits. You add your own touch, a small notch with a knife, a silent tally mark. Still here. Trade becomes more regular. Farmers from outside begin to leave fresh cheese, apples, even wine. Sealed tight, of course. One day, someone leaves a bunch of marigolds. No note, just color. You clutch them like treasure. Historians believe this level of cooperation between Eyam and surrounding villages was unprecedented. No guards, no fences, just an unspoken agreement. You stay, we help. And it worked. To this day, there's no evidence that Eyam's plague ever spread beyond its borders. Some suggest that Eyam's isolation wouldn't have worked in a bigger town, that its small size, rural location and devout community made it a perfect storm for successful containment. Others say it's just dumb luck. One fringe theory claims the village had a naturally lower rat population, less vectors, less disease. But considering the state of your attic lately, you're not so sure. You begin noticing how people have changed. The blacksmith, once loud and impatient, now sits for hours outside his forge, quietly sanding handles. The midwife who lost her daughter has started carving birds into driftwood. Tiny, beautiful things left on doorsteps like offerings. You take long walks alone, not far, never beyond the stone, but enough to feel the sky. You think about what it means to be alive while others are not. Survivor's guilt, they'll call it centuries later. Back now, it's just a dull ache behind the ribs. One afternoon, you pass Elizabeth Hancock. She's kneeling in the field again, not digging this time, just tending a small patch of flowers that have somehow taken root near the graves. She nods at you. You nod back. Nothing more is needed. Sleep, while still uneasy, returns in longer stretches. Your dreams are less frantic. You see familiar faces doing ordinary things. A meal, a song, a quiet evening where nothing goes wrong. You wake with the strange sensation of being rested. And it's not just you. People are beginning to clean their homes, fix their fences. A few even plant things. Late, yes, but there's still time for cabbage and kale. It's a gamble, but what isn't? One day, you hear laughter. Real, unforced, unpanicked laughter. You pause, hold your breath, and savor it. You can't remember the joke. Only that for the first time in weeks, someone sounded free. The vicar announces another update. We may be past the worst. No promises, no dates, just a careful optimism. His wife, Catherine, is not with him. She's been unwell. People say she refused to leave his side, refused to escape with their children when he asked her to. She stayed. She believed in Eyam's purpose. Catherine dies days later. He conducts her burial himself, standing alone with red-rimmed eyes. You watch from a distance and feel the weight of her sacrifice settle over the village like mist. You light a candle that night, not for her specifically, for everyone, for what you've lost and what remains. That same evening, someone plays music. A fiddle, faint and shaky, floats through the air. It's off-key. It's wonderful. You lie in bed and realize you're not counting heartbeats anymore. You're not quite sure how long you've been walking. The mist seems thicker here, curling along the edges of the road like it's whispering secrets to the stones beneath your feet. But you push forward because you've reached the real reason for this journey, the edge of Eyam. And just beyond it, the roadblock that was never made of swords or soldiers, but of solemn intention. It's called the boundary stone, though it's really more of a modest marker in the earth, ringed with little holes on top. Not something that would make headlines today, but in the 17th century, this was revolutionary. This was the line the villagers of Eyam decided not to cross. Not for bread, not for coin, not even for family on the other side. You crouch to examine one of the holes, and your breath fogs as you imagine what used to sit inside. Vinegar. Not for salad, but for sterilizing money. Coins would be left by the villagers for traders who ventured close but never entered. Goods were exchanged without a word or a handshake. It was commerce on mute, all trust and no contact. You can almost picture a grocer from the next town, creeping toward the stone, dropping off a bundle of flour, and retreating before the villagers even arrive. Historians still debate whether this practice was truly effective at stopping the plague. Vinegar, after all, isn't exactly a modern antiseptic. But intent matters here. The people of Eyam weren't just trying to survive, they were trying not to spread. In an era where disease was seen as divine punishment or airborne miasma, this was practically science fiction. You picture yourself as one of them, peeking through the trees at the delivery basket. Do you wave? Do you feel grateful? Do you wonder if the outside world pities you? or envies your conviction. From here, you follow the path toward the heart of the village. The houses are sparse at first, humble stone cottages with thatched or slate roofs and crooked chimneys that lean like tired elders. The village is quiet, almost reverent, and you realize why. You're walking into a place where nearly half the population didn't walk back out. The plague first arrived in Eyam with a bundle of cloth, supposedly from London, infested with fleas, though no one knew that at the time. What they did know was that shortly after the bundle arrived, people started dying, fast, and it wasn't long before the death toll made denial impossible. You pause near the Riley house, where the tailor who received the cloth lived. He died soon after. His assistant followed. The disease moved from room to room like a bitter draught, invisible and unstoppable. One moment you're stitching a hem, the next you're coughing blood. And still, the village held firm. Imagine the town meeting, neighbors huddled together in the stone church, faces lit by weak candlelight. The rector, William Mompesson, stands before them. He's not from here, but he's all they have. He proposes a plan: isolation, voluntary, total. The goal isn't just saving Eyam, it's sparing Derbyshire, maybe even all of Yorkshire. And here's where it gets truly surreal. The villagers agree. No one forces them. No decree is handed down from some distant lord. These are ordinary people, bakers, cobblers, shepherds, who choose to become a wall. You, standing in their shoes, might balk. Could you give up your loved ones outside the boundary? Could you resign yourself to burial by someone in gloves and haste, if at all? Everywhere you look, reminders of that choice persist. A cottage with its shutters nailed shut. A garden gone wild because its owner never came back. You spot a bench near the well, overgrown but still standing, as though waiting for a friend who's just running late by a few centuries. You reach out and trail your fingers along a stone wall, and it's cold. Not the cold of weather, but of memory, of sacrifice. And yet, life went on in its strange, diminished way. Children still played, though likely farther apart. Chickens still laid eggs, and someone still collected them. Meals were still made, prayers still whispered. Eyam was not a ghost town, not yet. But as the months passed, the names on the burial records grew like ivy. Entire families vanished. Elizabeth Hancock buried 6 of her children and her husband, all in 8 days, alone. In one of the most staggering acts of personal strength in the entire saga, she dug the graves herself on a lonely hillside. She didn't ask for help. She didn't want to risk anyone else dying just to share her grief. And as you walk past that very field, now known as the Riley Graves, you wonder how she did it, where she found the strength, where any of them did. The village graveyard fills quickly, and soon burials take place wherever there's room, behind houses, near trees, in sheep fields. It's not neat, it's not ceremonial, but it's necessary. People fall ill and vanish from the world in days, sometimes hours. Still, no one runs. That's what lingers here, more than sorrow. Not martyrdom or heroism exactly, just endurance. The quiet, relentless kind. The kind that doesn't expect a statue or a headline. Just the hope that, by staying put, they stopped something far worse from spreading. You pause in the middle of the village now. It's silent. Maybe you hear birdsong. Maybe just the wind. But beneath it all is a hum, like a story still being told by the stones. You wake early, or maybe you never quite slept. Hard to say. in a place where even the shadows feel like they remember too much. The morning light is gray and quiet, and as you step outside your imagined cottage, you realize the rhythms of Eyam in plague time aren't built around clocks or calendars. They're built around survival, around silence. The village feels like it's holding its breath. You head down the narrow lane, past cottages with shuttered windows, many marked with a crude cross of ash or charcoal. It's not mandatory, just understood. A way of saying, someone here is sick or gone. You give those houses a respectful distance, even though you know the disease is long since done. Old habits die hard, even in imagination. Still, there's life here. It's quieter, stranger, but it's there. A boy walks by with a bundle of herbs, lavender maybe, or rosemary. People believed strong scents could ward off the plague, that miasmas, bad air, were the culprit. He stuffs the herbs in his shirt collar, breathes deeply, and moves on. You hear a sneeze from somewhere nearby and flinch before you can stop yourself. That's modern reflex, of course. But for Eyam, every cough was a warning. Every warm forehead could be a countdown. Historians still argue whether the people of Eyam fully understood the implications of their quarantine. Did they truly grasp what they were risking? Or did the idea of a moral duty override the creeping horror of their situation? Either way, the daily routines adjusted fast. You pass the baker's house. No smell of bread today, just ash and cold stone. Food was prepared in bulk when someone was well enough to cook, and left outside for others to collect. No shared meal times. No gossip around the fire. Just you and whatever you could carry back. Water came from wells. Thankfully, most were private, so they didn't become sources of transmission. But fetching it was still a cautious ritual. You picture yourself creeping out at dawn, glancing both ways as if crossing a road, then drawing the bucket hand over hand like it might bite. You hold your breath as it emerges from the deep with a groan and a splash. It's not just the logistics that get to you. It's the loneliness. Funerals, if they happened at all, were brief and distant. No hymns. No shared grief. A family member might watch from afar as another was buried by a masked stranger, or, more often, not at all. Graves were shallow, hurried, sometimes just covered in loose stone until someone stronger could come and finish the job. You walk by the church now, St. Lawrence. It's still here, weathered but sturdy. In plague time, it was where the rector, William Mompesson, delivered sermons from the open air. He stood outside on the edge of the churchyard, his voice echoing off the surrounding hills so that villagers could hear him while standing far apart. You imagine one of those sermons. You're there, perched on a mossy stone. The breeze stirs your hair, and Mompesson is speaking, not with fire and brimstone, but with weary compassion. His wife, Catherine, is sick, but she's there too, wrapped in a shawl, keeping her distance. She begged to stay with him in Eyam when others fled. She would later die of the plague, one of its final victims. There's a quiet nobility in this kind of sacrifice. It doesn't come with parades or medals, just space, emptiness, a chair that stays empty at supper, a voice you don't hear in the morning. Over time, that becomes the new normal. You pass a garden that's gone wild. No one here to tend it, but nature doesn't mind. The rosemary bushes are fat and overgrown, climbing through a broken fence. A few chickens still wander in the yard, now feral and suspicious. One clucks loudly and startles you, because you'd almost forgotten what noise sounded like. The silence returns as quickly as it was broken. Further along the lane, you come to a house with a candle burning in the window. That was a common sign, an old tradition turned into a code. Candle means plague. Candle means stay away. Some homes burned candles for weeks. Some never extinguished them. And yet, the community persisted. People wrote notes to one another and left them under stones. They developed hand signals. A raised palm for, I'm all right. A touch to the shoulder for, I've lost someone. They kept living in their own strange, distanced way. You can't help but think of your own world, of elbow bumps and Zoom calls and grocery deliveries. The parallels are eerie and comforting. People adapt, always have. You come to a split in the road. One path leads out of the village, the one no one took for 14 months. The other winds back toward the center, where the infected and the hopeful lived side by side. You take the inward path. Not because it's easier, but because that's what Eyam did. They turned inward, not to hide, but to protect others, to let the outside world keep turning. And as you walk, the gravity of that sinks deeper into your chest. Even the smallest act here, a sealed letter, a silent burial, a bundle of herbs on a doorstep, carries weight. And all of it happened in a place barely a mile wide, a village that decided the world was worth saving, even if they couldn't save themselves. You wander through the heart of the village now, past low stone walls crusted with moss, past shuttered windows that haven't opened in weeks. The air smells faintly of wood smoke, herbs, and something else, dust and damp, like old cloth left out in the rain. You breathe through your nose, slowly. It's not the plague you're worried about anymore, but still. The instinct sticks. People aren't out and about like in normal villages. You pass the occasional figure, always from a distance. A stooped old woman in a linen cap gathering kindling with gloved hands. A boy sitting on a porch with a slingshot, but no targets. A mother whispering to her baby through a cracked door. Everyone is living behind an invisible curtain, present but unreachable. And that's the rule now. Don't touch, don't crowd, don't stay long. Even grief is on a timer. Still, people try to keep things going. You notice small, surprising signs of effort. Someone's left flowers in a jar on a windowsill. A bit of embroidery hangs drying on a fence post, the needle still tucked neatly in the thread. Over time, you realize these aren't just chores or hobbies. They're coping mechanisms. Quiet declarations. I'm still here, and there are new rhythms. Bells no longer ring for births or weddings, just deaths, and not always those. Instead, you begin to notice a kind of code in the smoke from chimneys. A thick, steady trail means cooking. A faint, uneven puff might mean illness. No smoke at all? Maybe they've left this world. Or maybe they've just run out of firewood. You start to understand the quiet genius of Eyam's quarantine. It wasn't just about closing the gates or asking people to stay put. It was about inventing a whole new way to communicate. One without contact, without touch, and without the comfort of closeness. To prevent the plague from spreading to neighboring towns, they created what was essentially a contactless economy. You hike the short path to the boundary stone, a boulder carved with simple coin-sized hollows. It looks unremarkable, just a lump of lichen-covered rock at the edge of a sheep field. But it's where villagers left money, soaked in vinegar to sterilize it, and where merchants from outside left food and supplies. You run your fingers over one of the indentations. The grooves are shallow, smoothed by weather and time. Some coins are still there in your mind's eye, glinting silver, damp from the vinegar, heavy with hope. It's the world's first no-contact checkout line. You imagine yourself on supply duty. You take a basket of coins and walk here before sunrise, careful not to be seen. You place them in the stone, check for any wrapped bread or salted meat left behind. If there's nothing yet, you wait at a distance, maybe behind a bush or a low wall, until the supplier comes and goes. No nods, no greetings, just an exchange of faith. Historians still debate whether these precautions actually worked. Was vinegar truly effective at killing the plague bacterium? Did the separation zones really make a difference? But what's not debated is the intent. The villagers of Eyam cared deeply about not becoming the source of further death. And that intent, that ethical stubbornness, shaped every action they took. You move on to the herb garden next. Every house had some kind of herbal remedy on hand, whether it worked or not. Rue, wormwood, sage, rosemary, the usual suspects in a medieval medicine cabinet. Some people burned herbs in their homes to cleanse the air. Others sewed little sachets and wore them like primitive face masks, convinced that good smells fought off bad death. One woman you pass, her name might be Anne, has a tiny walled patch behind her house, rows of neat little plants under cloches of glass. She waves to you, a flicker of something bright in her eyes. Not joy, exactly. Maybe endurance. You step back into the path and head toward the hills above the village. It's quieter up here, but that's part of the appeal. People came here to breathe freely, to look down over the clustered cottages below, and feel, for a moment, less trapped. You pause at a flat slab of stone where someone's left a little carved token, a wooden cross smoothed at the edges. You sit beside it, letting the wind wash over you. There's no sound but rustling grass and distant bird song. Here, away from the village, you get a sense of what they gave up. These hills could have been their escape route, but they stayed. You lie back in the grass, eyes half closed. You wonder what conversations happened here, whispered between spouses, between parents and children, friends debating the wisdom of it all. Did anyone try to sneak out? Historians say a few probably did. Not everyone agreed. Not everyone could take the fear, but most stayed. That's the part people remember. From this hill, you can see the entire curve of the valley, the clustered rooftops, the crooked lanes, the glint of the boundary stone just catching the light. It's all small from here, fragile, like a model village, carefully built and even more carefully held together. And in the quiet, you realize something else. This isn't just the story of a plague. It's the story of a moral decision so rare, so quietly radical, that it still echoes centuries later. A community that chose collective responsibility over individual escape. That chose sacrifice, knowing full well what it meant. You lie there a while longer, heart slowing, breath steady. The breeze cools the back of your neck. Somewhere down below, a door creaks open and then shuts again. Life goes on, even here, especially here. The days begin to blend into one another. You wake up, you check your breath, you scan your limbs for signs, spots, swellings, that telltale ache in your joints. You cook something bland. You boil water whether you need to or not. You do laundry with lye soap that stings your hands. You sweep even when there's nothing to sweep. You're not alone in these habits. Everyone in Eyam is building their own fragile routine, a series of daily motions that give the illusion of control. That's the funny thing about plagues. It's not just the disease. It's the waiting, the what-ifs, the little tricks your brain plays to keep the fear at bay. On a good day, you walk to the edge of the village and wave to someone across a field. On a bad day, you stay inside, and don't light a candle until dusk. Either way, you're still here. That counts for something. There's a man named Roland who's taken to ringing a handbell every afternoon from his front step. It's not a warning. He's not sick. He says it's to remind the village that time still exists, that people still hear. Sometimes he reads psalms aloud after the bell. Sometimes he just sings. You can't tell if he's going mad or staying sane by a thread. Then again, maybe there's no difference. You find yourself humming along once or twice. Not because you believe, but because it sounds like something from before. Other sounds begin to return. A blacksmith hammers faintly in the distance. He's not forging tools, just reshaping old horseshoes into charms. A baby cries next door, healthy lungs, strong wail. Somewhere, a fiddle scrapes out a tune too slow to be danceable, but you picture the fingers behind it, still remembering the motions. And then there are the letters. Paper's scarce, but people still write. Slips of parchment, notes etched on bark, even words scratched into dry clay. They don't travel far, just across doorsteps, over fences, folded into herbs or bread. Messages to loved ones you can't hug anymore, jokes to lift a neighbor's mood, recipes for herbal pastes, or, let's be honest, nonsense potions. One note that drifts your way says simply, "If you die first, leave the kettle clean." It makes you laugh, which is dangerous, because once you laugh, the tears aren't far behind. Historians still argue whether Eyam's literacy rates were unusually high for the time. What's clear is that communication, however it happened, kept people human, and that matters more than any cure. You sit outside now, with the sun half hidden by cloud. A group of children walks past, all a little too thin, each holding the hem of the one in front of them like a little human chain. They don't talk, but they walk the same short loop around the green every day at the same time. Maybe it's a game, maybe it's a ritual. One of them drops something. It's a carved bead, shaped like a bird. You pick it up, turn it over in your palm, then place it on a low wall near where they walked. They'll find it later. Or not. Doesn't matter. You're learning to live in a state of maybe, of not knowing whether the ache in your shoulder is from sleeping wrong or the start of something worse, of wondering whether someone's absence means they're dead or just avoiding everyone for sanity's sake. And through it all, there's the unspoken knowledge that this isn't over. You hear of more deaths, each family handling the loss their own way. Some dig shallow graves under apple trees. Others stack stones in private cairns. No priest comes. No rites are given. But the dead are remembered in objects left behind. A scarf tied to a post. A name carved into a beam. A cup turned upside down on a windowsill. You remember the church now, abandoned for worship, but not for meaning. Some villagers still leave offerings at the door, a sprig of thyme, a doll made from straw, a single flawless egg, old symbols for new prayers. You walk past it one afternoon and pause at the threshold. The door is open just a crack. You peek inside. Dust hangs in the air like smoke. The pews are empty, but there are footprints in the dust, wide and shallow. Someone else stood here, quietly, just long enough, and you realize belief doesn't always look like kneeling. Sometimes it's the act of carrying on, of washing a blanket for the third time, of baking bread even when you can't taste it anymore, of feeding the animals even after your family is gone. The animals, yes, they've become companions now. Cats are everywhere, fat and feral, seen as guardians against the rats. Dogs keep watch from porches. Chickens, despite the odds, still lay. There's a goat you've named Gertie who shows up at your window most mornings, expecting a crust. You oblige. She chews thoughtfully, like she's weighing your fate in her molars. You watch the sky change. The stars don't care about plague, about pain, about village boundaries or vinegar coins. The moon rises when it wants, spills light across empty streets and silent fields. Tonight, it's nearly full. You lean on your windowsill and breathe deep. No bells tonight. No new smoke from the chimneys. Just stillness. For a moment, it feels like the worst is over. And maybe it is. Or maybe it's just a moment between waves. You wake to a strange quiet. Not the eerie hush of dread, not the dead air silence that followed each new burial, but a different kind of stillness. There's bird song. Not one or two confused chirps, but a chorus, tentative but real. It makes you sit up straighter in bed, as if your posture might clarify what your ears are hearing. The smell is different too. Not vinegar, not smoke, not the sickly rot of decay, or the sterile bite of herbs, just earth, damp moss, turned soil, spring leaves. For the first time in months, the wind carries something like hope. You pull open the shutters and lean into the sunlight, and that's when you see her. A woman walking down the lane, not staggering, not coughing, just walking. A basket over her arm, a scarf tied neatly under her chin. She sees you and nods once before continuing on. And that nod, it splits something in you. You don't wave, you don't speak, but your fingers curl slightly around the windowsill, the wood warm from the sun, and you hold your breath just to make the moment last. That woman is Elizabeth Hancock. She's already something of a legend in Eyam. You've heard the stories. Her husband died early on, followed by 6 of their children, one after another. She buried them all herself, without help, in the field behind her home. Historians still argue whether the spot, now marked by a ring of weathered stones, was chosen for symbolism, location, or simply convenience. But the truth is, she couldn't ask anyone to help. Not in a self-quarantined village. Not when touching a shovel meant risking your life. And now she walks with her back straight and her head high. No one knows how she kept going. Maybe not even she does. But today, she walks. You go out shortly after, basket in hand, with no real destination in mind. The path to the boundary stone calls to you, and your feet answer. The boundary stone. It sits at the far edge of Eyam, on the moor where the wind never quite settles. A natural gray marker pockmarked with small hollows, filled now with vinegar. The idea was that soaking coins in vinegar would disinfect them. No one knows if it worked, but people believed it might, and belief is its own kind of medicine. That stone became the meeting point. Outside traders, farmers from nearby villages, a brave widow from Bakewell, a nameless monk with a heavy basket, left food, cloth, or news beside the stone. The people of Eyam left money in return, lowered carefully into the vinegar-filled pits. No one ever saw each other. They waited until the wind changed, or the sun shifted, or the birds stopped singing, and then they retrieved what had been left. It was commerce without contact, a fragile trust system etched in isolation. Today, there's a wedge of cheese resting in a clean cloth beside the stone. No note, no footprint, just the offering. You leave your coins and wait a respectful while. Then, basket slightly heavier, you begin the walk back home. The air smells of growing things. The first wild garlic is peeking up near the hedge line. A hawthorn tree has dared to bloom early. You spot 2 children chasing each other through the meadow, too far to scold, too fast to worry. And then you pass a small figure crouched near a low wall. It's old Luke, the weaver, whose hands shook so badly he couldn't tie knots anymore. He's weaving again now. Nothing fancy, just scraps of willow bark into a rough sort of tray. He looks up at you and grins, toothless and bright-eyed, and gestures at his creation with pride. "I'm back," he says, voice raspy. "Sort of." And you nod, because sort of is enough these days. You begin to notice more things. The door to the bakery is open, and a thin stream of smoke rises from the oven chimney. A child sits on the stoop outside the schoolhouse, humming tunelessly, kicking his heels against the stone. Someone's hammering again. Not charms this time, but a hinge, you think. Repairing, not warding. The vicar walks slowly past you, leaning on a stick. You nod in respect. He nods in return. You both carry the look of those who've seen too much and are still here anyway. He stops, looks up at the sky, and says, "There'll be lambs soon." You glance toward the hills and spot them, tiny dots moving awkwardly, tails flicking. New life, on schedule, indifferent to plague or pain. Soon, you agree. There's a cautiousness in the air now, not fear, but the nervous curiosity of survivors emerging from a long, dark tunnel. No one's celebrating. There's no feast, no announcement, no clean line between then and now. But things are shifting. The miller has opened one shutter. The beekeeper has checked her hives. The apothecary has started mixing remedies again, not for plague, but for sprains and headaches and heartburn. Ordinary things, lovely mundane things. The graveyard is quiet, not because there are no new dead, but because today no one is being buried. That's all it takes to feel like a turning point. Still, no one lets their guard down entirely. You sleep with one eye open. You sniff your food before eating. You still boil water. But your heart doesn't race every time someone coughs. And sometimes, just sometimes, you forget to be afraid for a whole hour. You find yourself whistling as you wash your hands. It's a nonsense tune. Probably something you heard at the May Fair years ago. But it sticks, and you catch someone else humming it the next day. In a village of less than 400 people, habits travel fast. The rhythms of daily life are starting to return. Not the same ones as before, but new shapes forming around the old scars. And you realize you haven't looked at the plague chart in weeks, the one you used to check obsessively, counting cases, tracking deaths. It's still there, curled at the corner of the table, but dusty now, untouched. You leave it. No need to open that page again. Not today. The morning fog is back, curling low over the cottages like a lazy cat, but this time it feels less like a warning and more like a blanket. Software familiar. You wrap your shawl tighter and step outside, squinting at the silvery outline of the village. No one says it aloud, but there's a subtle shift happening. People are tidying. Nothing major, just small things. A broom against a doorway, a basket of winter-stiff linens left out in the sun. Someone's even restrung the sign over the tavern, though it'll be a while before anyone's brave enough to serve ale again. It's rebuilding, but not the triumphant kind. This isn't a phoenix rising. It's a hedgehog peeking out of its burrow, sniffing the air, deciding whether the world is safe yet. Today, you've decided it might be. You head to the church, not for a sermon, because no one's holding those yet, but just to sit in the pew where you used to doze as a child. It still smells like wax and damp stone. Dust motes swirl in the colored light cast by the high windows. You run your fingers along the edge of the wood, feeling the old carvings. There's one you remember especially, a tiny face, half-finished, with eyes too big, and a grin that always seemed slightly smug. No one ever claimed it. People said it appeared on its own, and maybe, after the year you've had, you half believe it. A few others sit quietly in their own corners of the church. They nod at you, eyes tired but steady. No one speaks. There's a comfort in the silence now. It doesn't mean fear anymore. It just means peace. Later, as you make your way home, you pass the Riley cottage. Once it was sealed tight, planks nailed across the door, heavy cloth over the windows, a warning, a tomb. But today, someone's unbarred it. Inside, you glimpse dusty light and empty chairs. No one lived, not in that house. You know this. The whole village knows. But the door is open now, and that matters. It's not for looting, not in Eyam. Instead, it's for memory. You step inside carefully, breathing through your sleeve out of instinct, not need. The air is stale but not sour. A child's shoes sit by the hearth. A bowl of long rotted apples remains on the table. You don't touch anything. Just look. And then you whisper a soft goodbye to whoever might still linger and close the door behind you, gentle as a prayer. There are dozens of houses like that now, each one a quiet memorial. But slowly, the doors are being opened, a sign that it's time to remember, not to mourn. And then, one evening, there's music, faint at first, just a lilting tune carried on the wind. You follow it, curious, winding through the lanes until you find the source. Thomas, the vicar's son, coaxing a melody from a reed pipe. He plays as if trying to remember the shape of a song he once knew. Others gather. A few clap along, out of rhythm but enthusiastic. Someone hums, someone else laughs. It's not a celebration, not yet, but it's something. That night, as you lie in bed, you think about how different the village feels now. Not healed. No one's foolish enough to believe that. But less hollow. The graveyard is full of new names. The vicar's wife, the baker's twins, your neighbor's mother. Loss hangs in the air like chimney smoke, inescapable but no longer choking. Historians still argue whether Eyam's choice, its total self-isolation, saved more lives than it cost. Some say the village became a grim example of noble sacrifice. Others insist the quarantine was flawed, porous, or even unnecessary. The truth is buried somewhere in between the bones. But here's what you know. You're still alive. You lived through the plague, and you did it alongside others, even if you couldn't touch them. You remember the night old Marjorie stood in the middle of the lane and yelled her favorite recipe for onion stew, refusing to let the next generation eat bland food just because the old ones were dying. Or the time someone anonymously left hand-carved toys by every doorstep on All Hallows' Eve. Tiny horses, blunt-edged swords, a wooden fox that somehow looks cheeky. Those moments matter just as much as the charts, the symptoms, the death counts. They're the story behind the story. Even now, when strangers begin arriving, traders, curious scholars, nervous relatives, you greet them with calm. You don't tell them everything. How could you? But you meet their eyes and say, "We stayed." And that's enough. One day, someone will want to write it all down. The names, the order, the logic of it. They'll want to know how a village chose to cut itself off from the world for 14 months, facing down a disease no one understood. They'll want tidy answers, but you'll remember the messy parts, the nights spent half dreaming, half sobbing into a pillow, the absurd arguments over salt, the way rain on the roof could sound like weeping when you were tired enough. You'll remember the ghosts, the laughter, the endless walking circles you made around the garden to stay sane. And one day, you'll tell those stories. Maybe not today, but soon. The market square hasn't seen a true crowd in over a year. It's not exactly bustling now, But there's something like it. 4, maybe 5 families, standing well apart, laying out goods on the ground with cautious pride. You pass by one blanket and see carrots, crooked but vibrant. Another offers hand-spun thread, dyed with something reddish, onion skins or madder root maybe. You didn't come to trade, not today. You just want to see it, to remind yourself that the village's heart still beats. You spot Mary Cooper, who used to keep geese and secrets with equal skill. She's whispering something to a toddler who clutches her skirts like a lifeline. That child wasn't born when the plague started. You realize, with a strange jolt, that a whole generation will grow up having no memory of the worst of it. You envy them a little. Your own memories still flicker too easily. The fear that clung to doorknobs, the crackle of fevered breathing through a shared wall, the hopeless scramble to find fresh rosemary because someone swore it purified the humors. Historians still debate whether burning herbs, carrying pomanders, or sewing wax-sealed masks had any effect at all. Some say it was all superstition. Others argue that even placebo efforts created enough behavioral changes to slow the spread. You remember doing them all, not because you believed, but because you had to do something. Today, your hands are steady. You pick up a spool of thread and ask the price. Mary's daughter tells you with a small curtsy and a grin. You give her a bit extra. Later, you sit on the village green, legs stretched out, listening to the soft creak of a wheelbarrow passing by. There are children playing nearby, tossing a ball made from bundled rags and twine. They keep their distance naturally. It's become a reflex, like breathing or ducking when a sparrow swoops low. Behind you, someone begins a soft chant. Not a hymn, not quite. Just a droning melody, wordless, like bees humming through grass. You close your eyes. Do you remember when silence meant fear? Now it means calm. Of course, you still wake sometimes with your heart racing, breath shallow, hands clutching at nothing. But you're not alone anymore. You're not hiding. The dreams recede faster now, leaving less of a sting. There's talk of a messenger heading out soon, not to summon help, those days are past, but to send a letter, a real one, with news. You and a few others meet in the old rectory to draft it. The vicar's chair still smells like dust and candle wax. You write slowly, carefully, unsure how much truth to put on the page. Do they need to know how many died? Or how many lived? Do you mention the goats that wandered into the schoolhouse and stayed there for 3 weeks? Or the impromptu choir that sang across the valley from hilltops on Midsummer's Eve, careful to keep 100 paces between singers? You settle for this. We endured. We hope to see you again soon. No flourish, just fact. You seal the letter with a dab of candle wax and tie it with twine. It will be carried over the moor by a teenage boy with long legs and a healthy fear of badger holes. He wears a little cloth pouch of lavender around his neck, not because he believes it'll keep plague away, but because his mother sewed it there. And you don't argue with mothers who lived through this year. As he heads out, half the village turns out to see him off. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's symbolic. The first steps out after isolation. The path he takes winds past the Riley house, the Smith barn, the empty well where someone used to leave baskets of bread. You can almost see the lines that once marked your safe zones. How far from each cottage, how wide the space around a burial. Invisible boundaries that governed your every step. They've faded now. Not completely, but enough. There's still no hugging, but there is eye contact, a shared laugh, a brief touch on the shoulder with a sleeve-covered hand. You once read that in some towns, survivors of plague were treated as if they were cursed, pushed to the margins, whispered about. Some even faced violence. You wonder if that will happen to you, to Eyam. Will the outside world see you as brave or tainted? Historians argue over that part too, whether plague towns were shunned or romanticized, whether memory softens truth or sharpens it. You look around the green, where your neighbors sit on benches or squat in the grass. A boy plucks petals from a daisy. A woman threads a needle in the sunlight. Someone coughs, and everyone freezes for just a moment, but then the moment passes. You take a deep breath and smell wood smoke and time. Whatever they say, wherever the story goes after this, you know one thing. The village is still here. You are still here. And tomorrow, there will be more stitching, more singing, maybe even more laughter. The messenger's departure marks something, a hinge between what was and what might be. You think of it that way as you walk home in the pale evening light, feet tracing familiar dirt paths, worn smoother by a year of cautious repetition. Along the lane, the hedgerows are thick with summer. Bees bumble through foxglove blossoms, and a swallow arcs low across your path. A breeze catches your sleeve, and for the briefest moment, you imagine you could keep walking too, just like the boy did, out, away, over the hills. But you don't. Not yet. Not everyone's ready for that. The village is still living by its own calendar now. Not feast days or saints' anniversaries, but quieter, stranger markers. The week the mill restarted, the day we let the children play together again, the morning we saw smoke from the next parish, just faintly. Evenings have taken on new rituals. Tonight, you join a few neighbors for the slow task of repairing the broken thatch on old Mrs. Darby's cottage. She watches from the doorway with a cup of ale and commentary sharp enough to trim reeds with. You didn't like her much before the plague. Now, oddly, you do. Shared survival's a funny kind of glue. The moon rises before the job's done, pale and round behind the trees. You stretch your back and look down the slope to the churchyard. The yew trees there have grown wild, branches twisting like reaching arms. The new graves are still unmarked, too many to carve names for, too soon to decide how, or if, you should. Some say it's better not to remember. Others argue the dead deserve more than silence. Historians still debate how small communities preserved their stories after mass death, through songs, carvings, oral tales passed over bread and broth. You suspect it's less romantic than that. Sometimes, it's just one person who remembers and tells again and again until someone writes it down. You suppose that someone might be you. That night, unable to sleep, you sit with a piece of charcoal and a scrap of parchment and begin sketching names, just initials at first. Then, slowly, fragments of memory. Loved barley cakes, sang off key, walked like he was dodging puddles even when it was dry. No one told you how much of survival is remembering. You keep writing. By candlelight, your thoughts drift back to the day the rector stood up in the square and said the words that changed everything. That the village must not leave, must not flee, must stay inside its invisible wall and wait for the storm to pass through. He didn't command it, he asked. And somehow you all agreed. It wasn't noble, not really. It was terrified. It was the grim math of knowing that if you left, you might carry death with you to places untouched. You stayed. Most didn't. Across the country, plague towns emptied like spilt water. Survivors scattered, chasing hope across miles of uncertain terrain. But not here. Here you buried your own, brewed your own tinctures, invented systems of quarantine so meticulous they made future doctors scratch their heads in admiration. You remember the rope lines, one around the well, one across the gate. The hollowed-out stone where coins soaked in vinegar for hours before being retrieved. The cloth-draped signs to warn off strangers. No entry. Plague within. And now there's talk of taking down the signs. Not because the plague is gone entirely. It lingers here and there, a rumor in a cough or a pale face. But because people are tired of being a warning. They want to be something else. You sit beside the hearth that night and watch the fire die low. There's less fear now, but there's something else in its place, a quiet uncertainty. What do you become after surviving? A symbol? A relic? Just a person, like before? You don't know yet, but you're starting to ask the question, and that feels like progress. Later, wrapped in your blanket, you listen to the faint sounds of the village breathing. A door creaking closed, a baby fussing, a dog padding past your wall. These sounds used to fill you with dread, signs of movement, of contact, of risk. Now they sound like life. You don't sleep easily, but when you do, you dream of walking out of the village gate, not alone, not in a hurry, just walking, past the meadows, past the heather, into the world that's waited patiently for you to return. When you wake, the light filtering through your shutters has the clean, bright shimmer of a post-rain morning. You lie still for a moment, letting the sounds of the village soak in. Distant chickens clucking, a faint hammer on wood, someone humming a tune you half remember. There's something in the air, not change exactly, but the first breath before it. You pull on your jerkin and step outside, where the lane is still muddy from last night's shower. The earth smells rich and alive. Ahead, a group of children chase a wooden hoop down the slope, barefoot and howling with laughter. For a moment, you're tempted to join them. Instead, you watch. It feels like witnessing the return of something sacred. Joy. It's cautious joy, sure. It has the shakiness of a newborn foal, but it's here. Your neighbor, Clara, catches your eye as she passes with a basket of laundry. She smiles. Real smile this time, not the taut grimace of polite survival. "You smell that?" she says, gesturing to the breeze. Summer's turning. You can feel it in your bones. And she's right. The trees are starting to darken in their green. The sun sits a little lower in the sky. Time's moving again. You remember a day, not so long ago, when the only forward motion you could manage was turning a page in a prayer book. Now there's talk of harvesting barley early, of resuming trade, cautiously, with the outside world. There are still arguments, of course. The village council has split into roughly 3 factions: the leavers, the stayers, and the will decide next weekers. The leavers are packing bags, polishing boots, testing old road maps with hopeful fingers. The stayers? They've made peace with this place. They believe the walls, imaginary though they are, kept them safe, and that safety is worth maintaining. And then there's you. You haven't chosen yet. Instead, you visit the old smithy, where the forge is sparking to life again for the first time in months. Eli the blacksmith, leaner now but still broad as a door frame, is hammering out a new horseshoe with the rhythm of a church bell. He doesn't look up, just says, "About time we built something again." You nod and take a seat on the worn bench by the anvil. A few minutes later, the rector passes by. He's thinner, grayer, but something in his posture has changed. Less burdened, somehow. He pauses, glancing at the heat and smoke rising from the forge. "The bishop's letter came," he says quietly. You raise your eyebrows. "We're to be commended," he explains, "for our piety and sacrifice. then a wry twist of his mouth. They're sending someone to document us. Of course they are. Survivors are always good copy. Historians still debate how much outside attention villages like yours truly received after the plague receded. Some accounts speak of royal envoys, others of curious doctors. Still others claim no one came at all, that your story remained tucked away in the hills like a folded prayer. The truth, you suspect, is messier, as truths tend to be. Still, the idea of being written down, of being remembered by strangers, sits oddly in your stomach. So much of your survival has been about forgetting, letting the hardest days drift away like mist, letting the names fade from your tongue so they stop catching on your breath. Now, someone wants to come and ask questions, record answers, poke the embers of grief. You're not sure you're ready. Back home, you find yourself cleaning. Not just sweeping, deep cleaning. You dust corners you haven't looked at since last spring. You scrub the flagstones with sand and lemon balm. You even polish the hinges on your door until they gleam like silver. It's not for the visitor, not really. It's for you. As you fold linens and line up jars, you realize what's been growing, quietly, like mushrooms in the dark. Hope. Not the shiny, trumpet-blasting kind. The smaller sort. The kind that sits beside grief and says, "You can rest now." You made it. That evening, you climb the low hill behind the village. It's a place you rarely visit, once a favorite spot for courting couples and berry pickers, now overgrown and wild. But from the top, you can see far. The village below, smoke curling from chimneys, the thatch roofs golden in the late light. And beyond, fields, woods, a faint shimmer that might be a river. The world, it's still out there, and it's waiting. You dream that night of roads, long and winding, some lined with hedgerows, others nothing but dust and wild thyme. In the dream, you're walking, always walking, your feet light, your pack filled with bread and possibility. And when you wake, the urge remains, not to leave, not yet, but to walk. So you do. You tell no one where you're going, only that you'll be back by dusk. You pack a heel of bread, a wedge of hard cheese, and one of Clara's early apples. Then you step past the line, the invisible one where the path out of the village begins. It's astonishing how quickly your legs remember how to move freely. Past the final cottage, over the stile, across the furrowed field once left fallow during the worst of the summer. You hear skylarks above, and the whir of dragonflies skimming the hedges. Every sense is tuned, awake, the way sunlight touches stone, the creak of leather straps, the scent of crushed mint underfoot. You pass places once familiar, but now touched with mystery. The stream where you used to catch frogs as a child, the moss-covered milestone with Roman numbers barely legible, the hollow tree that always smelled of foxes. It's only 3 miles before you see it, a crossroads. Nothing fancy, just a place where your path joins a larger one, and that one continues on, dipping into forested shadows. Here, you pause, because here is where the world begins again. You sit on a flat rock and chew your bread slowly, eyeing the forest, wondering what lies beyond, whether the world outside has changed, whether anyone remembers you. Historians still argue whether isolated communities like yours emerged changed or simply frozen in time. Some say they became time capsules, sealed and static. Others suggest that survival required adaptation, quiet, constant shifts in culture, habit, even language. You wonder which side you'd believe if you were one of those scholars sitting in a dusty room in Oxford or Avignon, debating across parchment. You finish the cheese, brush the crumbs from your tunic, and stand, not to follow the road, not today. Instead, you take a single smooth stone from the path, white and round as a boiled egg, and place it carefully at the center of the crossroads, a marker, not of your presence, but of your decision to return. Back in the village, there's a buzz in the air. The outsider is coming tomorrow. You'd almost forgotten. Word has spread that the bishop's envoy will arrive by midday, bearing letters and questions and, possibly, the promise of royal reward, or at least recognition. That night, the village holds its first gathering in months. Not a service, not a mourning, but something between a meeting and a celebration. They light lanterns and hang them from the trees in the square. Bread is passed, along with pickled pears and a dusty bottle of last year's wine someone finally dared to open. You sit by the fire and listen. Clara tells a story about trying to catch a piglet that escaped the pen. Eli jokes about how the forge mice are now unionized. Even the rector lets slip a laugh that surprises everyone, including him. No one talks about the lost, not directly, but their absence is honored in the space between sentences. In the way heads nod, eyes linger, silences stretch before being filled with music or food or warmth. Late into the night, someone pulls out a lute. Someone else hums a familiar tune. Then gradually, voices rise. It's not quite singing, more like remembering. You don't join in. You just listen, head tilted, heart full. Because this is the moment, the one historians never quite managed to record. Not the statistics, not the dates or the death tolls, but this, the ache and ache and ache that turns somehow slowly into something soft enough to carry. Grief mellowed into memory, survival steeped into story. Eventually, you rise and leave the square, your steps slow and unhurried. The stars above are sharp and clear. For the first time in months, you don't feel watched. The sky isn't ominous, it's infinite. At your doorstep, you turn and look back once. The village glows faintly, like a lantern set in the dark woods. Still here, still alive. The morning arrives with a hush. No bird song, no clattering pans. Just the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. You wake before dawn and stand at your doorway with a bowl of water, washing your face as the sky begins to pink. Today is the day the outside world steps in. The bishop's envoy. It's not the first outsider you've seen. There was that desperate traveler last spring, whom you watched from the trees as he stumbled along the upper ridge, unaware that 100 unseen eyes followed his every move. But this time it's different. He's expected, invited in a way. Your village sent word, after all. A parchment rolled with trembling fingers, sealed with wax softened over a sheep-fat candle, delivered by a boy who volunteered to brave the forest and find the nearest monastery. And maybe, from there, the cathedral. Historians still argue about how effective these early communications were. Did monks really carry news between plague-bound communities? Were messages intercepted, misunderstood, ignored? No one can say for sure. But yours got through. And today, someone is coming. You join the others in the square, the same one where the lanterns still hang, now gently swaying in the cool morning breeze. Clara's tied her hair back with a ribbon so faded it looks almost white. The rector's polished his boots, though one still wobbles from a split sole. Little Dan, now barely little at all, clutches a carved stick as though it were a sword. A hush spreads, then hoofbeats. You feel them first, faint but rhythmic, pulsing through the soil. Then you see the glint of metal through the trees. And finally, a figure. One man. He rides a lean brown horse and wears a heavy traveling cloak, the color of old parchment. A chain with a silver cross glints from beneath his collar, and his face is ruddy, wind-chapped, and furrowed with years of squinting at long roads. You expect him to dismount immediately. Instead, he stops at the edge of the square and waits. He knows. Of course he knows. Even now, even with the worst behind you, contact carries risk. He gives you the courtesy of distance. It's your choice to close the space. So the rector steps forward, then Eli, then you. 3 paces, 10. The envoy dismounts. He holds no scrolls, no declarations, just a satchel, a water skin, and a face that holds more weariness than wonder. What follows isn't dramatic. No speeches, no gasps. He speaks softly, asking simple questions. Names, numbers, how many died, how many lived, how long you remained isolated, whether anyone left. Your answers are quiet, precise. He scribbles in a small book with a bone-handled pen. When you ask what he's writing, he replies, just trying not to let you vanish. He stays only a few hours, inspects the well, asks about your crops, leaves a pouch of coin and a note with the seal of the bishop himself, promises to send a physician before winter, and a proper priest if your rector needs relief. Then, just like that, he mounts up and goes. No dramatic farewell, just a nod and the turning of a horse toward the road. As he rides away, you feel a strange sensation. Not pride, not exactly. More like confirmation that the world is out there, yes, but you're still here, still part of it, even if only a footnote in someone else's ledger. That evening, the wind changes. It comes from the south, carrying with it the scent of crushed leaves and something else, cinnamon, perhaps, or roasted grain, and with it, a decision. It begins as a whisper, then a conversation, then a plan. This spring, someone will go. Not flee, not abandon, but go. To see, to learn, to return. You volunteer, of course. You'll carry letters, news, trade a few things, visit a cousin whose name you barely remember, come back before the barley harvest. It's decided before nightfall. And that night, in your dreams, the road opens again. Not a threat, not an escape, just a possibility. Historians still debate the psychological toll of plague isolation, whether survivors became timid or bold, paralyzed or resilient, whether they feared the future or clung to it like a rope in floodwater. You don't feel afraid. Not anymore. Not even when you pack. Not even when Clara hands you a bundle of dried herbs and Eli presses a knife into your palm, its hilt smoothed by years of hammer and sweat. You tuck it all into your bag alongside bread, an extra shirt, and the bishop's letter. At the gate, you pause, turn, look. The village stands behind you, quiet, alive, a little crooked in the morning light. Smoke curls from chimneys. A dog barks once, half-hearted. You nod once, to no one in particular, and step forward. Because surviving was never the end. It was only the start. You walk the first mile slowly. Your boots scuff along the rutted path, still the same path you used to sneak down as a child, chasing rabbits or trying to spy on passing carts from the edge of the trees. Now it's quiet, still damp from last night's mist. A few soggy leaves cling to your soles. Every few steps, you glance back, not out of doubt, just taking a final look. The village is already hidden behind a veil of trees, but you know every bend, every hollow. You can almost feel the rhythm of it continuing behind you, the bakehouse creaking open, someone hauling water, a door slamming against the wind. You're carrying all of that with you. The forest opens wide by mid-morning, and for a while, you see nothing but birds. They seem louder than you remember. A flicker darts past, A woodpecker taps somewhere nearby. It's strange how sharp the world feels. Colors seem richer, smells more layered. Even the wind feels different, like it's brushing off months of dust from your skin. And then, a road. Not a game trail, not a footpath worn by generations of cautious village feet. An actual road. Stones laid, cart tracks grooved, flattened by use and purpose. It's smaller than you expected. You imagined the world's roadways would be grand, but this one is humble. Still, it stretches. It connects. You walk it for hours. By midday, your pack feels heavier, though you've barely eaten. You pass a carved stone by the roadside, something old, worn with moss and cracks. A milestone, maybe, or a grave. You touch it briefly with your fingers, your first marker of away. Eventually, you reach a crossroads. There's a signpost. The lettering is rough, half faded by time and lichen, but you squint until you can make it out. One arrow to Braston, the other to Longmere. You've heard both names. Once, when you were smaller, a traveling merchant swore that Braston had a bell tower so tall you could see the sun set twice, once behind the hills and once in the bell's reflection. Longmere, someone said, had a market full of eels in baskets and pots of sweet boiled pears. You pick Braston, just because, and begin again. You pass a farmer who barely glances your way, a widow with a goat cart who asks, without irony, whether the bishop's still bald. You pass two boys chasing a stick down a ditch, and a woman humming as she washes linens in a muddy creek. The world has not ended. Not here. They lived through it too, clearly. Their own version. Their own sealed doors and emptied chairs. But they're here now, alive and brushing the dust off life as you are. And they don't look afraid of you. That night, you sleep in a barn, offered by a man with more hay than hospitality. You don't mind. The hay is soft, the barn dry, and the stars visible through a crack in the roof. You lie there, listening to the snore of the cows, the chirr of insects, and you think about the past 2 years. You remember the early days, the council debates, the quiet rationing of grain, the fear of opening a door, the guilt of each cough. You remember the first death, and the third, and the way grief didn't come all at once, but in slow, wearing waves. But you also remember the lanterns, the birthdays whispered through shutters, the day Clara found a way to make soap from wood ash and pig fat, the afternoon you heard music again, someone plucking a single string on an old weather-warped harp. You made it through, not by hiding, but by holding on, holding together. Historians still debate how the villagers of Eyam, yes, that's your village's real name, Eyam, managed it, whether isolation alone saved them, whether some were immune, whether divine intervention played a role, whether the rats simply moved elsewhere. No one agrees. But they do agree on this. It was one of the earliest, clearest examples of a community sacrificing its comfort, its very survival, for the good of others. By staying in, you kept others safe. By refusing escape, you became legend. Not that you feel legendary. You feel tired and itchy from the hay, but also something else, something quieter, steadier, like a story that's finally ready to be told. And as you drift to sleep beneath that cracked roof sky, you know this. You'll return. With spices, maybe. With news. With letters and questions and stories of your own. And one day, when some scholar in a robe pores over parchment by candlelight, you hope he reads your name, misspelled probably, in a footnote, and says aloud, just once, "They stayed, and now, here you are." The road behind, the village ahead, or maybe far below in some quiet corner of your memory. The wind has calmed. The candle flickers a little more slowly, the shadows on the walls stretching longer, thinner, as the last traces of this journey settle into stillness. You're not walking anymore. You're floating, drifting between the touch of wool blankets and the faded whisper of lanterns in a foggy square. The smells of old herbs and fresh bread still linger. The sound of distant bells, barely audible now. It's okay to let them fade. The fears you carried, the faces you lost, the quiet victories you barely noticed at the time, they're folded up safely now, tucked into the corners of your dreams like letters in a drawer. The world is still wide, but it's quieter here. Here, you're safe. Here, you did what needed doing. You stayed, you hoped, you waited. And even when the world stood still, you kept going, one gentle step at a time. Let your breath slow, let your shoulders fall. Let the quiet of Eyam wrap around you like a soft wool cloak. You made it. You're home. Sleep well, traveler.